You bombed us? Watch this. HFY, a sci-fi stories. The alien fleet hovered ominously above Earth, their massive ships casting dark shadows over entire cities. For weeks, they had launched bombardments, decimating major capitals around the world. Humanity had been helpless, outmatched by their advanced technology and brutal force. Then, on the morning of the fifth attack, something changed. Admiral Kovacs, the leader of the alien invaders, stood in his command room, looking out over the holographic map of Earth. His species, the Zilner, had conquered dozens of planets in their relentless expansion. Earth was just another conquest. The humans had resisted, but they were nothing compared to the might of the Zilner. We hit them hard this time, Kovacs said to his subordinates, his voice cold and confident. Their resistance is almost broken. Yes, Admiral, one of his officers replied. Their cities are in ruins, and their military is scattered. This planet will fall in a matter of days. But Kovacs's confidence was soon shaken. An alert flashed on his display, a transmission coming from Earth. It was a human message. Should we respond, Admiral? One of his officers asked. Kovacs waved his hand dismissively. Let's see what they have to say. The transmission flickered to life, revealing a human man in a ragged military uniform. He was standing in a desolate city square, surrounded by rubble, yet his eyes were filled with an unwavering defiance. To the Zilner invaders, the man said, his voice steady but loud enough for the alien fleet to hear. You bombed us. You destroyed our homes. You killed our people. But now you've made a mistake. You think we're weak. You think you've broken us. But we're not broken. We are human. And if you want to see what happens when you push us too far, watch this. The transmission cut out, and for a moment, Kovacs felt a strange unease in his chest. He had seen human broadcasts before, pleas for mercy, cries for help, but this one was different. There was something in the man's voice, something he couldn't quite place. Without warning, a new signal lit up on his command screen, an incoming data burst. Coming from Earth, the Zilner officers exchanged confused glances as they watched the message begin to decrypt. Kovacs frowned, his eyes narrowing as the stream of data turned into images, military installations, hidden bunkers, and underground factories, all previously unnoticed by the Zilner scanners. Then the true message became clear. The humans had been preparing, while their cities were bombarded, while their military seemed decimated. They had been building something beneath the surface, something the Zilner never anticipated. We missed this. How? One of the officers muttered. The answer was simple, humans were resilient. When one door closed, they built another. When an army fell, they rose with something new. They were adaptable, creative, and relentless. And now, they were fighting back. All across Earth, a chain reaction was set in motion. Human soldiers, once scattered and desperate, coordinated a counterattack from hidden strongholds. Advanced weaponry, reverse-engineered from the scraps of alien tech that had been abandoned, sprang to life. Cities that had been reduced to rubble now became launch points for humanity's retaliatory strikes. The Zilner fleet's advantage in space was quickly neutralized by a newly developed human counterforce, an interplanetary missile system unlike anything the invaders had ever seen. Kovacs watched in disbelief as his ships, once invincible, began to falter under the onslaught of human ingenuity. The humans were no longer just defending, they were taking the fight to them. They've adapted too quickly, one of Kovacs's officers whispered. The data, we missed it all. They were never as weak as we thought. Impossible, Kovacs growled, his claws digging into the armrest of his chair. How could they have done this? In a matter of hours, the tide of the war began to turn. Human forces, now equipped with superior weaponry and the element of surprise, systematically disabled the Zilner fleet. Their once imposing presence over Earth was no longer an advantage, it was a target. And just when it seemed like all hope was lost for the invaders, the final blow came. The human resistance, now fully coordinated and united, launched a devastating strike on the Zilner flagship, tearing through its shields and sending the vessel spiraling into the atmosphere. Admiral Kovacs stood in stunned silence as the massive ship that had been his pride and joy burned up in Earth's atmosphere. You bombed us? The human voice echoed in his mind. Watch this. The message was clear now. The Zilner had underestimated humanity. The Earth might have been bombed, might have been broken, But in the ashes, humans had found a strength that the invaders could never understand. And they were going to make sure the Zilner would never forget it. The Zilner fleet, now in disarray, had retreated to the outer reaches of Earth's solar system, their once proud ships limping under the relentless counterattacks. Admiral Kovacs, now furious and desperate, stood in the shattered remains of his command center. His once imposing fleet was broken, and the humans were more resilient than any species he had ever encountered. "This can't be happening," Kovacs muttered, slamming his fist into the console. "We underestimated them. We failed." His officer, the same one who had initially questioned the humans' strength, spoke up, his voice laced with disbelief. "Admiral, they've turned their own cities into fortresses. They're pulling in resources we didn't know they had. Their military is organized, and they have weapons, advanced weapons, beyond what we've seen." Kovacs snarled. "The humans don't have time for such advanced technology." "Where did they?" The officer hesitated. "They've been scavenging, reverse engineering our own tech, using it against us." Kovacs's eyes narrowed as he took in the full weight of the situation. The humans had done something he never thought possible. They had taken what his species had thrown at them, learned from it, and turned it against them in a way no one, especially the Zilner, could have predicted. The Admiral paced back and forth, trying to find a solution. "We need reinforcements. We need to bring in more ships from the other sectors. If we don't act now, Earth will fall fully into their hands, and they will never stop coming for us." But the officer's voice was filled with a mix of caution and fear. "Admiral, we've already called for reinforcements from our fleet. They're already on their way, but it will take time to arrive." "The humans?" "I know," Kovacs snapped. "The humans are relentless, but it doesn't matter. The war ends today." But as the officer began to turn away, another alert flashed across the screens. Kovacs's heart skipped a beat as he read the incoming transmission. It wasn't just from Earth, it was from another part of the solar system. It was a distress signal. "Admiral," the officer said, reading the transmission in shock. "There's a fleet of unknown origin approaching Earth." Kovacs's blood ran cold. "Unknown origin?" he growled. "How?" Another officer scrambled to make sense of the data. "It's a coalition fleet. Human ships, Admiral. Hundreds of them. They've allied with other species." Kovacs stared at the holographic display, his mind racing. Human ships, of all things. But not just human ships, alien species that had once been conquered by the Zilner. Species that had long been under the oppression of the Zilner Empire were now uniting under the banner of humanity. The humans had formed an alliance with their former enemies. The sheer audacity of it left him momentarily stunned. "They've brought the galaxy to their side," the officer said, his voice trembling. "How is this possible?" Kovacs roared, pacing frantically. "This is Earth. This is our conquest." But the officer, now almost whispering, replied, "They didn't just survive, Admiral. They thrived. And now they're leading the charge." The incoming fleet, a patchwork of ships from various races, burst into Earth's orbit, surrounding the remaining Zilner ships. These weren't just ships of war, they were a statement, a unified force, formed from the broken pieces of civilizations that had once been under Zilner rule. They were fighting for freedom. They were fighting for Earth. And they were fighting with humans. As Kovacs watched the scene unfold on his viewscreen, he realized too late that he had made a fatal miscalculation. The Zilner Empire, in its arrogance, had underestimated Earth. They had underestimated humanity. They thought they could crush them with bombs and firepower. They thought that breaking their cities and decimating their military would be enough. But humanity had fought back with more than just weapons. They had fought back with ingenuity, unity, and an unyielding will to survive. And now, Earth was no longer just the last stand of the human race. It had become the rallying point for all those who had suffered under the oppressive rule of the Zilner. Every race that had once been oppressed by the Zilner was now part of this new coalition. The humans had sparked a rebellion that the Zilner couldn't stop, no matter how hard they tried. The battle raged on as Kovacs's fleet, outnumbered and outmatched, was driven back. The humans and their new allies coordinated every strike, every maneuver, with precision. One by one, the Zilner ships fell, their shields flickering out and their engines sputtering as the combined forces of Earth's newfound allies overpowered them. Finally, After hours of intense fighting, the last of the Zilner warships was destroyed, leaving Earth and its surrounding space eerily silent. The Zilner Empire, which had once seemed invincible, was now nothing more than a broken and scattered force. Admiral Kovacs, watching from his flagship as it plummeted into the atmosphere, couldn't help but feel a bitter sense of awe. The humans had turned the tables on them. They had not only survived, they had become the leaders of a revolution that would echo across the galaxy. As his ship burned up in the atmosphere, Kovacs's last thought was a grim realization. The humans had bombed them first, but in the end, it was they who had detonated the greatest weapon of all, their unshakable spirit. And that was something no empire could ever conquer. The smoke of the final battle still hung in the upper atmosphere, and the remnants of the Zilner fleet had scattered into the vastness of space, fleeing for their lives. Earth had won, but the victory came with its own weight. There was no celebration yet, not in the way the human forces had hoped. The war had been long, and the losses were heavy. Cities lay in ruins, entire families had been torn apart, and countless lives had been lost in the defense of their home. But in the ashes, humanity had done the impossible. They had not only survived, they had sparked a revolution that stretched far beyond the confines of Earth. The human alliance that had formed with the formerly oppressed alien species was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Under Earth's leadership, the new coalition was slowly taking shape. Former enemies were now working side by side with humans to rebuild their shattered worlds, to restore what had been lost. But the war was far from over. "Admiral," a voice crackled through the comms, cutting through the silence of the control room. It was Commander Juno, the leader of the newly formed Earth Defense Coalition. "We've secured Earth, but there are still pockets of resistance. The Zilner are far from finished. They've scattered to the outer colonies, and we have to hunt them down." Commander Juno's voice was calm, but there was an edge to it. The victory felt hollow. There was still work to be done. Humanity had barely begun to process the weight of the war. The scars were fresh, but the coalition knew their next step was crucial. Earth had been the first target, but the rest of the galaxy, even with the united front they'd built, was still in peril. "We'll handle the remnants of their fleet," came another voice. This time, it was Captain Lorca's, the leader of the Khazar, a race of once subjugated aliens who had now joined forces with humanity. "We'll clean up the outer colonies, but Earth must be rebuilt. I suggest we prioritize civilian efforts and give the people time to mourn." Juno nodded. "Agreed. We've lost so much, but we have to rebuild, or the Zilner will have won in the end." For a moment, there was a heavy silence in the room. Rebuilding Earth was no easy task. Entire nations had crumbled, and the infrastructure that once supported billions had been reduced to smoldering ruins. Still, humanity was resilient. The same spirit that had led them to stand against the overwhelming might of the Zilner now sparked a fire of determination to restore what had been lost. "I'll work with the other leaders of the coalition," Juno continued. "We'll get Earth back on its feet, but we also need to keep the momentum. We can't let the Zilner regroup. We need to hunt them down before they have a chance to rebuild their empire." A new urgency filled the room. The battle may have been won, but the war was far from over. The Zilner were cornered, but their brutal nature would never let them go down without a fight. And though they had underestimated humanity before, they would surely make the same mistake again. It wasn't just about saving Earth anymore. It was about ensuring that no other species would ever suffer under the Zilner's iron grip again. Days turned into weeks, and Earth began to breathe again. In the cities that had survived the worst of the bombardments, humans and their new allies began the laborious task of reconstruction. New technologies, reverse-engineered from the remnants of the Zilner's advanced fleet, began to power the rebirth. The Earth Defense Coalition became a symbol of hope for all races who had once been oppressed. But deep in the far reaches of space, the remnants of the Zilner Empire regrouped. Kovacs had not been the only one to survive. There were others, scattered across distant star systems, holding on to the hope that one day, the Zilner would rise again. The defeated Earth had been a blow, but the Zilner were nothing if not persistent. The Zilner still had their armies, their weapons, and their burning desire for conquest. But now, they had an enemy that would never back down. They had an enemy that had shown them just how much they were capable of. For Earth, and for all those who had fought alongside them, the war was not over. It was only the beginning. As Juno stood on the bridge of the new Earth flagship, overlooking the vast expanse of space. She felt a deep sense of purpose settle over her. The war had changed everything. Earth had become the heart of a new, united front, a beacon of resistance. The fight against the Zilner wasn't just about revenge. It was about peace. It was about ensuring that no empire could ever again trample over the countless worlds that would one day call Earth their ally. And so, Earth's new chapter began. It would be a long road ahead, filled with battles, losses, and more sacrifices. But humanity had shown the universe one undeniable truth. If you bombed Earth, if you thought you could break them, then watch out, because they would rise again. And this time, they were bringing the whole galaxy with them. Months passed, and Earth slowly began to recover. But the work was far from over. The newly formed Earth Defense Coalition, a remarkable alliance of humans and former Zilner subjects, continued to grow stronger. The shared goal of eradicating the Zilner threat once and for all was uniting them all. Yet, the challenges of rebuilding and consolidating the forces of so many different species were immense. Juno, now the commander of the Earth Defense Fleet, stood on the observation deck of the flagship Unity, looking out at the stars. The peace they fought for was fragile, a single misstep away from destruction. Still, she couldn't help but feel a glimmer of hope for the future. "Admiral," a voice interrupted her thoughts. It was Lorca's, the Khazar captain who had quickly become a trusted ally. "We've secured the last of the human colonies in the outer system. The Zilner are still silent, but there's movement in the Drakkar Nebula." Juno's brow furrowed. The Drakkar Nebula was a cold, isolated region of space, one that the Zilner had used as a refuge before their failed attack on Earth. It was a place where they could regroup, resupply, and, if necessary, launch covert operations. It was the perfect hiding spot. "I've been expecting this," Juno muttered. "They're retreating into the shadows, but they won't stay there forever." Lorca's nodded. "We need to strike first. We can't let them rebuild. Not after what they've done." Juno turned to face him, her eyes hard. "We won't. I'll convene the council. We need to strike now, before they can regroup and launch another assault. If we wait too long, we might lose the momentum." The Earth Defense Coalition's council consisted of representatives from every race that had suffered under the Zilner regime. Humans, Khazar, the Tlori, once a slave race, now fierce allies, and other species they had liberated were all part of this united force. They had built something incredible, not just an army, but a family bound by shared suffering and a desire to ensure that the Zilner would never again have the opportunity to dominate. As Juno stepped into the council chamber, the leaders of the various factions rose in respect. The chamber, a vast, open space within the heart of the Unity, had been designed for such moments, when history was being written. Juno stood tall, her eyes meeting those of the other commanders. "We've been given a unique opportunity," she began, her voice calm but filled with purpose. "The Zilner have retreated into the Drakkar Nebula, but their silence is a trap. They're planning something, and if we don't act now, we risk them rebuilding a new fleet, a new empire. We can't let that happen. We must strike." The Tlori representative, a tall figure with silver-scaled skin and black eyes, spoke up first. "I agree. The longer we wait, the more they will prepare. But we cannot ignore the fact that they still have resources in that sector. They could have allies hidden within the nebula." Juno nodded. "That's a risk we'll have to take. But if we wait for perfect intelligence, we risk losing the advantage we've gained. We need to move now, swift and decisive." Lorca's, ever the pragmatist, added, "We've established an extensive network of scouts in the nebula. I suggest we send a small task force ahead to probe their defenses, gather intel, and, if possible, strike their most vulnerable outposts." The council debated strategy for hours, each representative offering their own perspective on the best way to approach the nebulous threat. Ultimately, it was agreed that the coalition would send a joint strike force into the Drakkar Nebula, led by Juno herself. The goal was not only to disrupt the Zilner's forces but to eliminate any chance of a counteroffensive before they could regroup. As the planning concluded, Juno found herself reflecting on everything they had accomplished and how much was still at stake. It wasn't just about saving Earth anymore, it was about ensuring that no race would ever be enslaved again, that no other world would feel the crushing weight of the Zilner's cruelty. That night, as the fleet prepared for launch, Juno sat alone in her quarters, Looking out at the stars, she couldn't help but think of the human soldier who had first delivered the message to the Zilner. "You bombed us? Watch this." The words rang in her ears, and in them, she saw a symbol of everything Earth had fought for: the spirit of defiance, the unyielding will to survive, and the strength to rise up when all seemed lost. With a final glance at the stars, Juno stood up, her mind clear. Tomorrow, they would move out. Tomorrow, they would finish this. The Unity and the Coalition's fleet jumped into the Drakkar Nebula, a sea of gas clouds and black voids that seemed to swallow them whole. The Zilner had once used this place as a base of operations, but now it was their graveyard. The nebula was dense and treacherous, a perfect hiding spot, but also a place where any large fleet would struggle to maneuver. "We're entering their territory," Juno said, her voice crackling over the calms. "Stay sharp. The nebula plays tricks on sensors. We need to stay in formation and be ready for anything." Her orders were clear, and the fleet responded immediately, their ships coiling like serpents around the jagged formations of dark gas. The tension was palpable. They were no longer just hunting the Zilner, they were hunting the ghosts of an empire that had once thought itself untouchable. As they ventured deeper into the nebula, strange things began to happen. The sensors flickered, and the ships drifted in and out of range. The nebula was a deceptive maze, but Juno's forces were no strangers to adversity, and as they pushed forward, they encountered something unexpected: a network of Zilner warships, still operational and well hidden within the nebulous cover. It was a trap. The Zilner were far from finished, and now, they were about to see the full might of the humans, and their allies, fighting back. The moment the Zilner fleet emerged from the dense gas clouds of the Drakkar Nebula, Juno's heart pounded in her chest. The ambush had been expected, but the sheer scale of the force waiting for them was something else entirely. The Zilner had not only survived, they had been biding their time, quietly rebuilding, gathering strength in the shadows. "Admiral," Lorca's voice cut through the static of the calms, "there's more of them than we anticipated. We're surrounded on all sides." Juno's eyes scanned the displays as the Zilner warships, sleek and menacing, closed in from every direction. Their dark forms seemed to blend into the nebula, but the red glows of their weapons systems began to pulse menacingly in the surrounding darkness. "They've been waiting for us," Juno said grimly. "This was their plan all along. They knew we'd come." "Do we fall back, Commander?" asked Captain Vera of the Tlory, her voice steady despite the tension. "No, we fight. We don't retreat. Not now. Not after everything we've been through. We take the fight to them." Juno's voice was unwavering, as firm as the steel of the Unity's hull. "Prepare for battle. All ships. Form defensive rings and engage at will. Keep their fire focused on us. Let's buy our fighters some room." There was no hesitation in the responses from the coalition forces. The humans, the Khazar, the Tlory, and all their allies had fought together for this moment. The Zilner had thought they could outlast them in the nebula. Now, they were going to find out just how wrong they were. The first volley of plasma blasts lit up the dark void, sending shockwaves through the fleet. Explosions rippled outward as Zilner warships unleashed their weapons, their advanced technology crackling with deadly energy. But the coalition was prepared. Shields shimmered, and coordinated counterattacks struck with pinpoint precision. The Unity's cannons thundered, cutting through the nebula's darkness and into the heart of the enemy. "Fighters, deploy," Juno barked. "We need to disrupt their formations, target their engines and weapons arrays. We don't give them a chance to regroup." Hundreds of coalition fighters shot out from the belly of the Unity, their sleek bodies cutting through the dense clouds of gas. The small but agile ships darted around the larger Zilner warships, firing pinpoint shots at key systems. The Zilner responded, their own fighters zipping forward, but they were outnumbered and outmaneuvered by the human-designed ships that had been modified with alien tech. Amidst the chaos, Juno's flagship took a direct hit from a plasma barrage, causing the ship to shudder violently. The bridge lights flickered, but Juno stayed calm. "Status report," she demanded. "We've lost aft shields, Admiral," came the voice of Lieutenant Rhea, her hands flying across the controls. "But the forward shields are holding. We're good to go for now." Juno nodded. "Keep the pressure on them, Lieutenant. This won't end until their fleet is nothing but scrap." Her thoughts flashed to Earth, to the faces of the people who had fought so hard to protect it. To the soldiers who had made the ultimate sacrifice, the Zilner had made a mistake coming here. Underestimating humanity had been their undoing. And now, the galaxy would bear witness to the consequences. Admiral, Lorca's voice came through again, this time filled with urgency. We've got a major breakthrough. The Zilner flagship, its shields are weakening. I think we can take it down. Juno's lips curled into a fierce grin. Good. All ships, concentrate fire on their flagship. We're ending this. A storm of firepower erupted from the combined forces of the coalition. Plasma beams and missile salvos rained down on the Zilner flagship, which struggled to stay in the fight. The massive ship groaned under the barrage, its shields flickering and collapsing as explosions racked its hull. For a moment, the Zilner fleet seemed to hesitate, unsure whether to push forward or retreat. Juno knew this was their chance to strike the final blow. Push them, she ordered, her voice a battle cry. Engage with everything we've got. Show them what happens when you try to break us. The coalition fleet surged forward, all their remaining strength focused on the beleaguered Zilner flagship. The flagship's massive cannons fired in retaliation, but its shots became more erratic as its systems began to fail. Juno's eyes locked onto the view screen, watching the flagship's final moments play out. One last coordinated strike, a flurry of missiles, laser blasts, and energy beams punctuated the darkness. The flagship's shields collapsed entirely, and the mighty ship began to break apart. With a final, deafening explosion, the Zilner flagship disintegrated, its shattered pieces scattering across the nebula like debris. Cheers rang out across the coalition ships. The Zilner flagship was gone. But the battle was far from over. Stay focused, Juno reminded her fleet. We've only crippled their command structure. The remaining ships are still formidable. We need to finish this, now. Despite the damage to their fleet, the Zilner refused to surrender. They fought tooth and nail, desperate to maintain their control over the nebula. But the tide had turned. Without their flagship and with their forces in disarray, they could no longer match the sheer tenacity and unity of the coalition. It took hours, but one by one, the remaining Zilner ships were disabled, their weapons systems overwhelmed by the relentless assault. The nebula, once a dark sanctuary for the Zilner, was now the site of their final defeat. When the last Zilner ship finally fell silent, drifting in the nebula's vastness, a collective sigh of relief swept through the fleet. But Juno knew this wasn't truly over. The Zilner had suffered a major defeat, but their empire stretched far beyond this battle. The galaxy was still a vast, dangerous place, and there would be others who would rise to take the Zilner's place. The coalition had won, but there was still much work to be done to ensure peace. Admiral, Lorca said, stepping forward as the final battle report came in. We've done it. The Zilner are broken. Juno took a deep breath, her expression solemn. Yes, but this victory isn't the end of our fight. It's the beginning of something greater. She looked out across the fleet, at the ships of all the allied races that had come together under Earth's leadership. They had stood together, not just as soldiers, but as something more, friends, allies, and protectors of a new era. The work ahead would be hard, but for the first time, Juno allowed herself a small smile. They had won, yes, but more than that, they had shown the galaxy what humanity was capable of. And now, it was time to make sure that the galaxy would never forget. As the final remnants of the Zilner fleet drifted, defeated and scattered, the coalition forces began the slow process of securing the Drakkar Nebula. Juno stood on the command deck of the Unity, her eyes fixed on the aftermath of the battle. The vast expanse of the nebula was filled with the wreckage of enemy warships, some still flickering with the last sparks of life. But more importantly, the nebula was now silent. The coalition had won, but the war had taken its toll. Their fleet was battered, and the victory, though decisive, had not come without sacrifice. The flagship of the Khazar, the Talon of Karuk, had taken heavy damage in the final assault, and several smaller ships had been lost. The human fleet, too, had suffered losses, but they had fought with unmatched resolve, proving to the galaxy once again that they were not a species to be underestimated. Juno leaned back in her chair, her fingers tapping rhythmically against the console in front of her. The battle had ended, but the real work was only just beginning. Admiral, came the voice of Lieutenant Rhea, pulling Juno from her thoughts. We've established a perimeter. No new enemy forces have been detected in the immediate vicinity. However, there are signs that the Zilner have been communicating with other factions in the galaxy. We may still have threats to deal with. Juno nodded. I figured as much. We won't have peace overnight. She rubbed her temples, the weight of leadership pressing on her. Begin gathering intel on these factions. We need to know who could potentially rise to fill the void the Zilner have left. And keep an eye on any internal movements within the coalition. We can't afford to be blindsided now. We'll get right on it, Admiral, Rhea replied. Before Juno could respond, the comm system crackled once again, this time with the voice of Captain Lorcas. Juno, Lorcas began. I've got something you need to see. I think we've found something. Or someone. Juno's interest piqued immediately. What is it? There's a vessel in the outer ring of the nebula, nearly undetectable due to the gas clouds. It's small, but it's been broadcasting a distress signal. It's strange, though. The signature doesn't match anything we've seen before. Juno straightened up. A distress signal? In the middle of all this wreckage? She shook her head in disbelief. Can you trace its origin? It's coming from a small ship. Definitely not Zilner. Lorcas confirmed. We're preparing a team to investigate. I wanted to make sure you knew before we proceed. Send a team. I'll join you, Juno said. We don't know what's out there, and it could be important. Moments later, Juno suited up and entered the docking bay. Lorcas was already waiting by the airlock, his form towering as usual, a Khazar warrior at his side. Together, they led a small team of specialized soldiers, humans, Khazar, and Tlori, onto one of the fleet's faster reconnaissance ships. As they left the Unity and ventured into the nebula's depths, the stars outside seemed distant and faint, swallowed by the dense clouds of gas. The ship's sensors hummed as they cut through the fog, tracking the distress signal with unwavering precision. There it is, Lorcas said, pointing toward a faint blinking light ahead. It's small, but it's there. The ship was tiny, practically a lifeboat by the looks of it, and seemed almost out of place amidst the debris of the larger Zilner fleet. As they approached, Juno felt a sense of unease. There was something about the situation that felt wrong. This was too easy. The Zilner had been wiped out. Their forces were scattered, but this ship was still sending out a distress signal, almost as if it were bait. Stay alert, Juno ordered. We don't know what we're walking into. The team docked with the ship, the airlock hissing as it opened. The inside was eerily silent, no signs of life, no immediate threats. But as they moved deeper into the vessel, they found signs of recent activity, hastily abandoned equipment, data terminals flashing with incomplete transmissions, and something more unsettling. A figure, hunched and cloaked, sat at a central terminal, its face hidden, but the posture, slumped, as if exhausted, spoke volumes. The figure turned at the sound of the team's approach, its eyes glowing faintly beneath the hood. Juno stepped forward, her hand resting on the hilt of her sidearm, but she didn't draw it yet. Who are you? She demanded. And why are you sending a distress signal in the middle of a battlefield? The figure stood slowly, its movements stiff as if it had been too long since it had last interacted with anyone. It spoke in a language that Juno couldn't understand at first, but before she could react, one of the Tlori engineers stepped forward and began translating the strange dialect. The figure's voice was low, almost a whisper. You don't know what you've done, do you? Juno's brow furrowed. What do you mean? The figure stepped forward, pulling back its hood to reveal a face half human, half Zilner. The hybrid creature looked at Juno with a kind of haunting recognition. You think you've beaten them, the figure said, but the Zilner were never the true enemy. They were merely pawns in a far greater game. What you've just done, what you've just started, you've only made things worse. Juno's mind raced. This wasn't just any survivor of the Zilner War. This was something else entirely. Who are you? She demanded again, her voice sharper this time. The hybrid's eyes glinted with an unsettling knowledge. I am the consequence of the Zilner's past, and now, your past is about to catch up with you. Before Juno could respond, the ship's internal alarms began to blare. The system was under attack. Admiral, Lorcas shouted, we've got incoming. Juno spun on her heel and headed back toward the airlock. The distress signal had been a trap, this creature wasn't alone, and the game was far from over. The galaxy had just been thrust into a new, Far darker chapter. The battle had ended. Yes, but something far more dangerous was waiting in the wings. And Juno knew they were not prepared for what was coming next. The alarms blared, and the air in the tiny hybrid ship grew tense with the suddenness of the attack. Juno's heart raced, her instincts kicking into overdrive. She had barely had time to process the disturbing revelation, the hybrid, a product of the Zillner's twisted experiments, now claiming that the true enemy was still out there, when the ship's hull trembled from a blast that shook it to its very core. "Admiral," Lorcas shouted again, as the deck buckled under their feet. "They're coming out of nowhere. We're surrounded." Juno's thoughts raced. The hybrid creature had clearly known this was coming. It had been waiting for them. But who were these attackers? And why hadn't the fleet picked up their signatures earlier? "Status report." "Rhea," Juno barked into the comms, her mind already running through possible scenarios. "We're picking up multiple unidentified ships emerging from the nebula's edge. Admiral, they're using a frequency we've never encountered before." Rhea's voice cut out, replaced by a cascade of static. Juno's grip tightened on the console. The ship was already beginning to lose power, the lights flickering and dimming with each successive hit. The hybrid creature, meanwhile, remained eerily calm, eyes glinting with some strange knowledge. "This is it, isn't it?" Juno's voice was low, a realization starting to settle over her like a cold shroud. "You knew this was coming. You knew they would attack." The hybrid gave a slow, almost regretful nod, its voice full of grim finality. "You've unleashed something ancient. The Zillner were pawns, yes, but they're masters. They are the true enemy. They were waiting for you to destroy the Zillner. Now that they are gone, the true war can begin." Juno's pulse quickened. She had suspected that the Zillner were not the ultimate threat. But this was something else entirely. Who are they? What do they want? The hybrid hesitated, as if weighing the risk of telling her too much. "The Zillner were their soldiers, their vanguard. They've been watching you for centuries, pushing you into conflict, testing your strength. They wanted you to fight the Zillner, to think you were victorious. And now," the creature's eyes glowed brighter, the words heavy with foreboding, "now, they come to finish what the Zillner started. You've become their target." A sharp, echoing crash shook the ship, and Juno had no time to process the hybrid's words further. Her mind snapped back into action. "Get back to the airlock," she shouted to her team, already moving toward the exit. "We've got to get back to the Unity, now." As she led the way, the hybrid creature's voice followed them, its tone almost warning. "The ship is compromised. They've already disabled our communication systems. You will not escape them as easily as you think." The corridor twisted as they sprinted toward the airlock. Their steps hurried but controlled. The tension in the air was palpable, thick with the knowledge that they were being hunted. And the hybrid was right, their escape wasn't guaranteed. The unknown fleet had arrived, and they were likely far more advanced than anything they'd faced before. Juno reached the airlock door and punched in the override code, her fingers trembling with urgency. She had to get back to the Unity. They needed a plan. If they didn't act quickly, they could all be trapped in the nebula, completely cut off from the fleet. With a hiss, the airlock slid open, revealing the cold, black void of space outside. The recon ship was still attached to the Unity, but the approach wasn't safe. The unknown fleet was closing in, and every second spent outside the protection of their own flagship could be their last. "We're not out of this yet," Juno muttered to herself, preparing to jump into the vacuum of space to reach the Unity's airlock. Then, a voice broke through her thoughts. "Admiral," the hybrid said, its voice low but urgent, "they will find you. They will come for you and everyone else in the fleet. You cannot outrun them." Juno glanced back, meeting the hybrid's gaze. "We'll fight them. We won't let them take us without a fight." The hybrid's expression shifted slightly, its features softening. "You don't understand. They've already won. The war you think you're fighting is only a distraction. You must prepare yourselves for the true war, the one that is coming." The words hung in the air like a heavy weight, and for a moment, Juno could feel the very bones of the ship creaking under the threat they faced. "We don't have the luxury of time," Juno said firmly. "I'll take my chances. We'll fight. You can either help us, or stay out of the way." The hybrid paused, its glowing eyes scanning her face, as if measuring her resolve. Then, it nodded, almost reluctantly. "Very well. But know this, the enemies you face now are not just from the Zilner Empire. They are older, stronger, and they've been watching you for far longer than you can imagine. Before Juno could say anything else, the hybrid stepped back, retreating into the shadows of the ship's inner corridors. She had no time to question its motives further. If what it said was true, the galaxy was on the cusp of something much darker, far beyond even the Zilner threat. With a final glance at the hybrid's retreating form, Juno led her team out into the vacuum of space, the Unity's airlock drawing them in with an artificial hum. The stars beyond were quiet, too quiet. The unknown ships were now visible, their dark forms looming in the distance, far too close for comfort. "Admiral," Lorcas said as they docked, his voice a mix of resolve and worry. "What now?" Juno exhaled slowly, the weight of everything they had just learned pressing down on her. "Now, we prepare for a war that we didn't know was coming. And this time, we don't fight just to survive, we fight to win." Inside the Unity, the bridge was already buzzing with activity as they monitored the unknown fleet. The rest of the Coalition's ships were in position, but they could feel the ominous shift in the atmosphere. The galaxy had changed, and the real battle was just beginning. "Admiral," Rhea reported from the tactical station, "the unknown fleet is moving into formation. They're preparing to engage. We're not going to get a chance to regroup." "Then we won't regroup," Juno replied, her voice hard and unwavering. "We'll face them head-on. Get ready for battle, all ships, and send a message to every Coalition fleet, this is it. The real war starts now." The comms crackled with confirmations from every corner of the fleet. The Coalition was ready, but the question loomed large in Juno's mind, would they be enough? And as the unknown ships approached, Juno realized that the galaxy was about to learn one irrefutable truth. Humanity wasn't just going to survive this war, they were going to change the course of history.